Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Greetings of the day, friends. Now we start with lecture number 6. So, I'll discuss with the issue of agriculture subsidies now. Our previous discussion was based on subsidies and countervailing measure agreement that sets the platform for the discussion on subsidies from the WTO perspective, mainly concerning the goods. Agriculture agreement on agriculture actually is a very distinct agreement, and subsidies regarding the agriculture products is covered under that agreement. The definitional part is covered under, or let's say the classification part is covered under subsidies agreement, but the types of subsidies that are classified under subsidies agreement are not covered, or they are not applied for the purpose of discussing agriculture subsidies or subsidies for agriculture products. But the principal aspect, or let's say the conceptual aspect of subsidy that we have discussed and that is laid in subsidies and countervailing measure agreement is likewise applied in the agriculture products also through agreement on agriculture. Surprisingly, this agreement on agriculture has its own preamble. Now, why there was a need to have its own preamble? Because the practice of giving agriculture subsidies existed even prior to the creation of GATT, WTO. And the member states of the WTO, they were very reluctant to reduce the subsidies for agriculture purpose. There is a very big divide when we talk about the subsidies from the perspective of goods and subsidies from the perspective of agriculture products. Reason being, because if you see thoughtfully, the economic concepts that mainly deals with the industrial products or industrial goods, the same cannot be applied for the agriculture goods or the agriculture products. That is because the pattern of agriculture trade, the pattern of agriculture output is not purely in the hands of human efforts or human beings. They are always, or to a great extent, dependent upon the natural order, or you can say the course of the nature, because sometimes it can depend upon the climatic conditions, sometimes it can vary depending upon the level of fertility of the soil, or various other reasons that are beyond the control of human beings. So, applying the same economic concepts as we apply for the industrial goods, for the agriculture products could be a bit unfair. That was one of the main reason why they were, or the leaders of the state, they were reluctant in reducing or deciding that subsidies should be given or not, to be determined by the WTO as a controversial aspect. And the same we see even till date, that whenever the issue of farm subsidies or agriculture subsidies arises in the WTO discussions or is discussed even in our countries, the farmers, you can see, are all in protest. Now I will start with the preamble of this agreement. It states like this: having decided to establish a basis for initiating a process of reform of trade in agriculture in line with the objectives of the negotiations as set out in the Punta del Este Declaration. Punta del Este is basically place in Uruguay, and when it was laid down that there will be a reform for the trade in agriculture products, then definitely they have to follow certain rules of the international trade law that cannot be ignored. Why it was so? Because now, after member states signing the WTO agreement, or let's say after framing of this World Trade Organization, it was very clear that the goods the term goods will not only be confined to the industrial goods, but also the agriculture goods will be included in that aspect. Therefore, the member states, for applying the economic policies, for applying the trade policies, they will have to discipline the method of doing agriculture. They will have to regulate the use of state funds with regard to the agriculture, because the problem of agriculture cannot be isolated from the problem of international trade law. So that was now the question, whether we consider the problem of agriculture trade as a part of problem of agriculture trade law, or we simply isolate the question of agriculture trade and see it in a different perspective. So since that could not be feasible, why that could not be feasible is another question. Now the question can be answered like this. Now some of the member states were classified as developed, developing and less developed in the WTO system. Then some of those developing nations and less developed nations, they were very good in farm products, or their economy was very much depending upon the trade of farm products. Like you can see, India is exporting basmati rice. Pakistan is also exporting basmati rice. Sri Lanka is exporting tea. India is exporting its tea products, tea, and otherwise also India is involved in exporting fruits. Countries from Latin America, they are also exporting various kinds of eatables and fruits. So that means there is a potential from the developing nations and even from the less developed countries, that includes mainly the countries from Africa, to trade by selling their agriculture products or exporting these agriculture products to the developed nation. And that will be rather helpful for these nations. Why? Because after selling these agriculture products, they will be able to earn sizable amount of foreign exchange, and through that foreign exchange they will be buying the technological products, or they will support the enhancement of the technology. So in that respect, it was seen to initiate trade between two different blocks, that is between the developed nation countries and developing and less developed countries. On the other side, the sale of agriculture goods or export and import of agriculture goods can be somewhat beneficial for the developing and developed nation. But then the question was, what kind of parameters should be adopted to regulate that agriculture trade? So therefore, it was decided that by and large the same rules as that are applicable for the industrial goods, that should be applied, but then the type of flexibilities that are adopted in this category, in the category of agriculture trade, that could be defined through different agreements. Like we have now agreement on agriculture, so that was one another aspect. Then the member states, they were also given the flexibility to define their reservations when they joined the WTO, and that is known as the concept of reservations in optional protocol, or when the member state joined any such treaty based institution. So in the protocol of accession, it was decided that the member states who have certain reservation with regard to giving preferences to agriculture goods, or they wish to continue with farm subsidies to a certain extent. I mean, the protocol of accession was not somewhat free way giving to, or it was like a complete liberty giving to the member states to continue with their subsidies for agriculture product. It was not like that. The idea was that these countries or these member states, they will gradually reduce the extent of agriculture subsidies, but to what extent they are deviating presently from the existing rules, that can be noted in the protocol of accession. It was like that. So the member states have mentioned this in the protocol of accession, where they wish to deviate from the general rules as mentioned in the agreement on agriculture. Now I start with the preamble here. having decided to establish a basis for initiating a process of reform of trade in agriculture in line with the objectives of the negotiation as set out in Punta del Este Declaration. That means they decided that whatever has been decided in Punta del Este, that is in Uruguay, that will be the guiding source for making reforms in trade in agriculture. Recalling that their long-term objective, as agreed at the midterm review of the Uruguay round, is to establish a fair and market-oriented agriculture trading system, and that a reform process should be initiated through the negotiation of commitments on support and protection and through the establishment of strengthened and more operationally effective GATT rules and discipline. So, it further reiterated that the long-term objective as agreed at the midterm review of the Uruguay round is to establish a fair and market-oriented agriculture trading system. Now, what is fair trade, or let's say the fair and market-oriented agriculture trading system? That means, fair here means that the country or the government of a state should not keep on supporting their farmer simply based on subsidies, or they should keep on giving extra bonus or extra, let's say, support in order to continue farmers producing same kind of crops. So they have to take the similar risks as the risks are taken by those who are involved in industrial goods. And then market oriented agriculture trading system, that means in case the farmers of a particular country, they are unable to produce the crops, or they are, let's say, not fulfilling the, or they are not able to produce the crops up till the sustainable level for their population. Sustainable here means to a required quantity that is essential for their population. Then the other option, instead of giving extra subsidies or extra support to the farmers, the countries or the state should think to import those agriculture products or agriculture goods. I mean to say, if let's say a country is relying for its basic, there are 5 to 10 crops, basic crops like rice, wheat, pulses, sugarcane, and several others that are very essential for a country or for any nation. And despite putting efforts, the farmers of that particular country are not able to produce to an extent that they will be able to feed their population, or that will be enough for their population. Then instead of giving extra subsidies so that the farmers still continue growing the same crops and reach to basic limits, instead the nation should think of purchasing or importing those crops from some other countries where it is possible. So I explain it like this: the fair and market oriented agriculture trading system is like this. Like this is country A, and it cannot produce all 5 essential crops. All right, 5 essential crops this country cannot able to produce. To meet the requirement. All right. Now, one method is that the government of this country, it should start giving subsidies to the farmers, that you still keep on trying to produce all these 5 essential crops, so that we do not depend upon the foreign market, or we try to be self-sufficient, as it is kind of a nationalistic ideas, but sometimes it could be essential, but usually these are the nationalistic ideas that we must be self-reliant. Now here, let's say it gives $500 of subsidy to its farmers. But then the question is, how many countries can afford giving subsidies to this extent? $500 of subsidy to each farmer who can produce these 5 essential crops to a certain level. Now there is another option that instead of giving this $500 subsidy, why not to get these essential crops by, if it is available, if these 5 essential crops the state can avail from somewhere outside by giving $400, okay, this much of price for these 5 essential commodities, 5 essential crops. So this is still like, if we go by the mechanism of international trade, that is like based on market system, market oriented agriculture trading system, then they, instead of giving subsidy or instead of wasting it for farmers to compel them compel them to crop these essential crops, it would be better option to purchase it from outside or to import these 5 essential crops. So that was the idea with which the agriculture reform were quoted in the WTO setup during the Uruguay round, and after even after Uruguay round, during the various conferences. So it further states agriculture trading system and that a reform process should be initiated through the negotiation of commitments on support and protection and through the establishment of strengthened and more operationally effective GATT rules and discipline. So now how this can be changed or how this can be reformed? That is through negotiations of commitment, that gradually the nations will decide or come to the terms as are settled in the GATT rules, that it would be better option to gradually reduce the state support to the farmers and instead making them independent. Not only making them independent, if a country is not able to produce the required amount of farm products, so why not to import it from outside? Commitments on support and protection and through the establishment of strengthened and more operationally effective GATT rules. And further, the more effective rules that are available under the GATT discipline, they should be applied for making the farm reforms in a particular country, in any particular country of which is member of the WTO. Further, the preamble states, recalling further that the above mentioned long-term objective is to provide for substantial progressive reductions in agriculture support and protection sustained over an agreed period of time, resulting in correcting and preventing restrictions and distortions in world agriculture market. Then further it was emphasized that the long-term objective, now with what objective these reforms are referred or with what objective these reforms are advocated, that is to provide for substantial progressive reduction in agriculture support. That is, the countries or the government of the countries, they finally adhere to this principle, that they are now attempting to reduce the support they are giving to the farmers. Now, why they should reduce the support being given to the farmer? Reason being because basically it is the taxpayers' money that is used for the purpose of subsidies, and that is not the very fair method of pricing the farm products or supporting the farmers. So they must figure out what alternatives could be there for making the fair price of the farm crops, and also what alternatives can be chosen in case the crops do not are coming up to the expectation in the market. So objective is to provide for substantial progressive reduction in agricultural support and protection sustained over an agreed period of time. Now, as stated earlier, that we cannot expect, when the agreement on agriculture was introduced, it was very clear that such a big change that cannot be expected overnight, since the practice of giving agriculture subsidies was a very long term practice or that existed even prior to the advent of GATT and WTO. And member states were very rigid that why should they deny subsidies to their farmers. So the idea was that gradually through negotiations, different round of negotiations, whatever support is being given, that should be gradually reduced, and finally it should be done with, or it should be now made clear that no more state support can be given to the farm sector. And protection sustained over an agreed period of time, resulting in correcting and preventing restrictions and distortions in world agriculture market. Now, the it was not only linked with some WTO objective that we need to reduce the subsidies and gradually end up with the subsidies, but that was connected with the economic concept that how market distortions can be improved, or how far we can get rid of these market distortion if we reduce the extent of subsidies being given to the farmers. Correcting and preventing restrictions, that is the restrictions that are imposed for the farm products, they must be no more allowed, or they must be prevented. And then likewise, there will, as a consequence of this change, automatically the distortions that are created in the world agriculture market will be removed. Committed to achieving specific binding commitments in each of the following areas. Now, how this reform in the market sector for agriculture goods, for trade in agriculture goods, can be done? There were certain yardsticks, or let's say certain measures pointed out. If they follow these, the states follow these measures, then automatically there will be reform in the market of agriculture sector. So these were market access. That means the foreign farm producers, or the foreign country from where the crops can be imported, they must be allowed market access to the other countries. That means there should not be any restrictions or any hindrance to those foreign exporters of the farm goods, stating that because of the nationalistic ideas, or stating that our farmers will be at risk if we allow the foreign farm products entering into our market. So that kind of mindset has to be changed by giving free market access to the foreign producers, or foreign producers of the farm products. Then the domestic support measures. The domestic support measures, they can be of various kinds: state support in the form of subsidies or financial support, then crop insurance, then there can be support by means of fertilizers giving at a concessional rate, and many others. So that kind of domestic support was questionable, that how far the state should allow this domestic support. Export competition. There must be competition in export sector of agriculture products, that we should not simply confine that our farmers are, if they are producing enough of the crops for our own use, that is enough. But whether we can enhance the productivity by fair means, and after enhancing the productivity of the crops, whether that can be further exported in the other countries or not. So that kind of approach should be adopted in a fair manner, not by giving the subsidies. So that will be better for the growth in the international trade of the agriculture products. And to reaching an agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary issues. Now, sanitary and phytosanitary issues, they were, since the farm products, they are not only confined to the crops, but also the final products like eatables that are made out of those crops. Maybe they are chips, or they can be any food stuff that is exported to the other countries. They should meet the required health standards, that they are not infectious, or they meet the health requirements of the other countries. So that standard has to be maintained on a uniform basis. It can't be that some countries, they have a lower standard with regard to the health concerns or hygiene concern, and some other countries have the higher standards of hygiene. So the countries having higher standards of hygiene, they put restrictions on the import of the goods from the countries having lower hygiene standards or lower health standards. So that kind, the uniformity has to be maintained, and that was through agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary issues. Having agreed that, and in implementing their commitment on market access, developed country members should take fully into account the particular needs and conditions of developing countries. Now, as recalling here the preamble of the WTO itself, where it was made very clear at its outset that opportunity should be created for the people of developing and less developed countries. Now, we cannot ignore when we are discussing any agreement and any agreement within the WTO system, and then we are also stating to these agreements are meant for promoting free trade, but we cannot ignore what are the challenges being faced by the developing and less developed countries here. So, agriculture agreement or agreement on agriculture talks about a very vital or fundamental reform in agriculture sector, economics of agriculture, but then at the same time we cannot forget the challenges being faced by developing and less developed countries. So here in the preamble itself, that is reiterated, having agreed that in implementing their commitments on market access, that means if the market access is allowed or it is permissible for agriculture goods also, developed country members should take fully into account the particular need and conditions of developing country. So they should take into consideration what are the requirements and challenges faced by the developing countries. Members, by providing for a greater improvement of opportunities and terms of access for agriculture products of particular interest to these members, including the fullest liberalization of trade in tropical agriculture products as agreed at the midterm review, and for products of particular importance to the diversification of production from the growing of illicit narcotic crops. So, the WTO members, by providing for greater improvement of opportunities and terms of access for agriculture product of particular interest to these members, including the fullest liberalization of trade in tropical agriculture goods. So, whether they have agreed for any kind of goods, here goods means the agriculture goods that are of tropical agriculture products, for the products of particular importance to the diversification of production from the growing of illicit narcotic crops. So, they are supposed to discuss this in detail when they are making these reforms. Now comes free trade versus subsidies for agriculture sector and the challenges faced by agriculture sector. Coming to the basic idea with which the WTO is created, that is free trade, then comes alongside the issue of subsidies for agriculture sector and the challenges faced by the agriculture sector. Now, as we all know that free trade is something that talks about reduction in the trade barriers, and the same applies with the agriculture goods. But there are pertaining questions here that subsidies to the farmer, that is not simply because to get any benefit or to maintain certain export level, but sometime when we talk about the climatic conditions, when we talk about the insects infecting the crops or flood like situation, so there the question of subsidies, as it is earlier decided in the subsidies and countervailing agreement, that they can be classified as prohibited, actionable and non-actionable, those categories cannot be applied, or those types of subsidies cannot be applied here when we talk about that for the agriculture purposes. So that challenges still remains, and therefore we cannot say whether the idea of free trade, if applied on an equal basis for the agriculture products, would be a very fine, let's say, or a very nice interpretation of the WTO objective. That somehow does not fit into this consideration. So therefore, this remains still a matter of debate, and still is an ongoing debate among the member states and different blocs that are created in the WTO. Mainly, there are a group of countries that support farmers' lobby, and then there are a group of countries that are against the support being given to the farmers lobby. So that debate keeps on going. But we are very clear with it that the answer still remains to be, the best answer still remains to be chosen. There is no clear-cut answer with regard to it, whether we should go for total elimination of subsidies for the farm products. Reduction of tariffs and market access commitments under Article 4 of the Agreement on Agriculture, how far feasible? Now, Agreement on Agriculture very clearly introduces with the commitment that the member states will gradually reduce the tariffs on the market access. That means they will allow the imported agriculture products to be sold in their market with no discrimination. So that means they have to reduce the tariffs, and that is covered under Article 4 of the Agreement on Agriculture. The extent of agriculture subsidies to be mentioned in optional protocol. Optional protocol, that is when the members have joined, they have mentioned it very clearly that on what basis and after how long they will be able to reduce and finally wind up the subsidies. Agreement on agriculture covers both subsidization for sales in domestic market and subsidies for export. Now, what are the features of agreement on agriculture? Like in prohibited categories of subsidies, we are discussing in subsidies and countervailing measure agreement. We have mentioned that the prohibited category includes the subsidies given for the purpose of export and also the subsidies given for the purpose of domestic use of a product or domestic buying of a product that is domestically produced when it is in competition with a like product that is from a foreign country. All right. Now here there is a bit of difference here. The first part is similar to that of the export subsidy, that is agreement on agriculture covers both subsidization for the sale. I take here the later one, subsidies for export. That means if a state is giving concession to its farmers for export of any farm products to gain foreign exchange or to establish itself in a foreign market, that is what we mean here by the export subsidy. Like in India, we allow the sugarcane growers, the farmer who are growing the sugarcane, they are given some extra concessions. So that has been also challenged in the WTO. That is one aspect of giving the export subsidies. Now then is the subsidization for the sale in domestic market. That is of a very different nature. Now how it is? We have the concept of minimum support price, that is MSP, announced even prior to the harvest. So in that way we allow the farmers, some kind of assurance is being given to the farmers. Whether that should be considered as the non-justifiable category of subsidies or subsidies that should be removed remains unanswered, because that varies from country to country. But here, as per the agreement on agriculture, they have simply categorized it as a subsidies for the domestic market. That means the government of a particular country is giving the farmers that they should sell their farm products at this particular price. Now why it is done so? Okay, that is done for two reasons. I explain this. Subsidies given to the farmers for sale in domestic market. That is for two reasons. One is, like, let's say if the country produces wheat, all right, the farmers of country A, they produces lot of wheat, and the price of the wheat is, they have quoted, is, let's say, $500 per quintal. Since this country produces enough of the wheat, or it produces in abundance, so the price they have quoted is $500. This is the free price. Now the other countries, let's say country B, C, D, they do not produce wheat in abundance. Now the farmers of country A know that they can sell the same wheat to country B, country C and D at a higher price, and that higher price can be around $700. All right. So if they export their wheat to these countries, to B, C and D, then the price can be, they can get the price of $700 per quintal. All right. Now the government will intervene here. The government will intervene and say that we are ready to purchase your wheat for $600, but you should not export. We will purchase it for $600 and give you $600 per quintal and other benefits. Now, why government does so? That if they allow the wheat to be exported to country B, C and D, then there can be hike in price of the wheat in the home country. And can even cause shortage of food, or it can cause some kind of black marketing in the home country. So that is one reason why the subsidies are given for the domestic market. That is one reason, to maintain a balance of stock in the home country, and there is no food like crisis, or there is no such black marketing in the home country. One reason is this. Second is that farmers know they have two options or three options. One is to cultivate wheat, other option is to cultivate sugarcane, and let's take, they have also the option to grow cotton. All right, these are the three options. Now they know that if they grow cotton, they will be benefited, highly benefited. If they grow sugarcane, then they will be even more benefited. But if they grow wheat, then they won't be much benefited. So what the government does, government announces a minimum support price for wheat, that they will get at least $600 per quintal for wheat, if they grow the wheat. All right. So that will be like inducing factor, and this $600 per quintal is a higher price. The actual price for the wheat is, let's say, $400 per quintal. I mean, the government can obtain this from the foreign market. The government can obtain the wheat from the foreign market at the rate of $400 per quintal, but government is willing to pay $600 per quintal as a minimum support price, so that the farmer remain motivated for cultivating wheat rather than the sugarcane and cotton. Why this? In order to maintain food balance. All right, that the nation should not rely on the foreign markets for the food stuff, because wheat is the food crop and these sugarcane and cotton, they are the cash crop. So to maintain that kind of self-sufficiency, the government adopts these kind of policies. So that is bit of difference when we talk about subsidies, when we compare this concept of subsidy with the industrial subsidy. And here, this is what it means by subsidization for sales in domestic market and subsidies for export. Subsidies for export is of similar nature, that is giving different kind of concessions for increase in the export. Next is, WTO has adopted agreement on agriculture with objectives such as, firstly, to establish a basis for initiating a process of reform in agricultural trade, that I have discussed with you already. The basic idea is to bring reforms. Next is a long-term goal to reduce agriculture support and protectionism sustained over an agreed period of time, also discussed. Achieving binding commitment in the areas of market access, reduction in domestic support measures, and increase in export competition. Next is how agriculture subsidies affect international trade. Now this is something, a very crucial thing, that how basically the subsidies being provided to the farmers affect international trade and why it is unfair. Now take the concept of subsidy itself and why the WTO is advocating to reduce the extent of subsidies. Now, as per the WTO rules, it says that subsidy is an unfair practice even if it is for the farmers. Subsidy is unfair trade practice even if given to the farmers. What happens? Let's take the example, country A, the main crop for sustenance is wheat. All right. Now, if the country A gets or it grows the wheat crop, let's take the quotation on a per quintal basis. Then for per quintal wheat, it has to pay $500 to its farmers, $500 per quintal. Okay, this is the amount it has to pay to its farmers, but this is the amount that is paid after subsidies being given. So actually the price of the wheat, let's say, is in this country should be $400, but $100 of subsidy is paid extra to the farmer. So that is how the price is quoted here. All right, now what is the cost of wheat in the international market? That is how we need to correlate the things. WTO has defined a term that is known as external reference price. Now what it says, what the WTO says, external reference price of wheat. That is, the WTO will consider 10 countries that have highest yield of wheat, or they are the maximum producer of the wheat at the minimum price. Okay, 10 countries, maximum producer of wheat at minimum price. That means they have to invest minimum amount to get maximum amount of wheat. That is what I mean to say, that their investment is minimum and their outcome is quite high in terms of wheat. So it will select the first 10 countries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, like Russia, US, China and other countries, they will be selected. And what is the average price of wheat per quintal in those countries? Okay, so let's say by calculating, the average price comes out to be around $400. That is the average price of the wheat per quintal. That will be considered as external reference price. That means in the world market, the quoted price of wheat is the fair price or assumed fair price of the wheat is $400 per quintal, and this country is buying the wheat at the rate of $500 per quintal from its farmer. It is simply buying the wheat $500 per quintal from its farmers and then selling it to its people or to its citizens with $550. Okay, and that means $150 is wasted. So the WTO says, when you compare the amount, the price of the wheat in your country with that of the external reference price of the wheat, that is calculated based on the best producers, and that is lower than what you get it from your own market, and in order to maintain a balance you will have to give the subsidy. So government has two options here, either to sell the wheat in the open market in its own country at the price of $550, or then to give the subsidy of $150. That means to bear the cost of $150 from its own pocket, from its own resources, and sell it at the rate of $400 in its own country to maintain a balance between external reference price and the domestic price. So that means it is suffering losses. So WTO says that this is a very unfair method of doing or dealing with the farmers. But unfortunately, most of the countries in the world, they practice the same, whether it's developing countries or the developed countries. Reason being because farmers often is a very emotional issue, and that has a very great impact on the electorate or during the voting time. So here you can very clearly see the unfairness that exists here. And as per the WTO, this is basically a distortion being created. Why there is a distortion? Because the extra wheat these 10 countries do have, that could have been exported to this country, country A, at a lesser cost, and these farmers could have been induced to produce something else, or their factors of production, if they are considered as a labor, so that labor could have been applied for producing something else. So there is a double disadvantage in giving subsidies to the farm sector when the same crop is available at a cheaper external reference price. So that is a very deeper analysis being done by the WTO. But as I said, the farm sector is a very emotional issue, and no country is willing to give the issue of subsidies to when it comes to the farm trade. Next is what I have also tried to point out what we mean by the term external reference price. External reference price is basically comparing the domestic price of any crop with the external reference price. Then the extent of subsidies provided to regulate the domestic price creates the extent of trade distortion. We have just now discussed this. Subsidies for agriculture are a crucial issue for member states. Why? There are other reasons for giving the state support to the farm sector. One of them is the price volatility. Now, what is price volatility? That is a market situation where, and all the nations faces this price volatility. The difference is some faces it to a great extent and some to a lower extent. Price volatility is kind of uncertainty that is caused in the price because of the demand and supply dilemma. Like we often hear that sometimes the price of onions have shot to 100 rupees per kg or even 200 rupees. Sometimes the price of tomato has hiked suddenly. So that is one such incidence where we talk about the price volatility. Now, there are many countries which if the price of the foodstuff has hiked suddenly, they get panicked and they do not have recourse, because our country is very big and the various regions of our country have different kind of farm potentials. So we are very safe in that regard. But many countries that are small, and if they suffer from this price volatility in the farm sector, then they are in a very risky situation and suddenly the market situation become very chaotic. So they try to motivate their farmers to at least continue growing the main crops that are required for their sustenance. So here price volatility in a market situation is of demand and supply dilemma, and its effect on the prices. Next is the issue of food security. Now, food security is a very, very important issue for all the developing and less developed countries, because it can't be that the developing and less developed countries, they keep on focusing for their industrial progress, they keep on focusing for the technological progress, but consequently they totally are deprived of the food being provided to their people, or at least to the people those who are below the threshold level. That should be taken into consideration. Like in India, we have Article 21, that is a fundamental right to life and liberty. Now, right to life also includes the minimum or basic level of food being provided to all the people. So food security this problem cannot be solved until unless there is a government intervention. Like government procures the farm products or the crops from the farmers and keep it for the public distribution system, and they provide the same crops at a cheaper price to the people living at a threshold level or at a marginal level. So that is one way we are trying to solve the problem of food security. Other nations are also trying to resolve it, but definitely they have to provide subsidies to their farmers to keep going the concept of food security alive. The agreement on agriculture was intended for better functioning of market and to establish confidence in food security at both national and global level. Because if we make the big promises by agreement on agriculture and are not able to sustain our own population, or a sizable number of people from our own country, they get deprived of the food, or they do not get the quality food, then there is no use of this agreement on agriculture. So the food security and price volatility are the two important factors that somehow gives the scope that why or initiates the debate in favor of giving subsidies for the farmers. Need for classification of agriculture subsidies. Now, as stated to you earlier, that realizing the fact that we cannot go with the same kind of classification as is meant for the goods. So the Agreement on Agriculture has devised its own method for classifying the subsidies being given to the farm products, and they are in the form of amber box, blue box and green box. Now why there is such like qualification, amber box, blue box and green box? Because subsidies were being provided to the farmers even prior to the GATT or prior to the WTO itself, and member states, they were very reluctant in totally zeroing the subsidy. They till date are not very happy reducing the subsidies to the farmer, but they promised that there will be a gradual reduction. So when they committed that there will be gradual reduction, then the second idea was that at least to fix to what extent they will reduce in this year, to what extent they will reduce in next 5 years, so that kind of thing. So here the amber box means the annual support that is being provided. I write it, the amber box here means farm subsidy provided prior to WTO will be reduced. Reduced gradually. So that is, for example, now the WTO came to function on Jan 1995. At that time, any country is giving, let's say, country X is giving or 10 million of subsidies to farmers growing sugarcane. Okay, so at the time when the WTO started, country X was giving $10 million of subsidy to the farmers who were growing the sugarcane. So after the categorization, it was decided that this 10 million is a very trade distorting amount, so that has to be reduced. So it agreed that after every 5 years, it will reduce by, let's say, 10%. Okay, there will be 10% reduction after every 5 years. So that means in the year 2000, if we reduce here the 10 million, so there will be deduction from this 10% from this 10 million, and the remaining amount that will continue. In another 5 years, there will be further reduction in the 10% of the remaining amount. So that is what it was stated in the terms of amber box. Now what was the classification of subsidies for amber box? Those that are considered as trade distorting, that has to be reduced. So that was the criteria for classifying the subsidies in amber box category. Amber box declaration based on AMS is an exposition of the existing level of support, that is support given before the formation of WTO. Article 6 clause 1 emphasizes the reduction of state support. Now what is AMS? That is aggregate measurement of support. After amber box, there is another category, that is blue box. Subsidies under this category acknowledge the use of subsidies for justifiable purposes. State support under this class are kind of exemptions from the general rule of prohibition, but subsidies in this category must be kept within the defined limits so that their effects are not trade distorting. Now within the blue box system, there is a different category of subsidy that is not basically trade distorting, but their continuation, okay, or sometime that can be if their value is increased or the amount of support is increased, then they can produce trade distorting effect, or sometime if it is continued for a higher period of time, then also it can be considered as trade distorting. Now how it is, how the amount can be increased or the value can be increased. Like government is giving minimum MSP, minimum support price for sugarcane growers. All right, let's say there is a fixed price that they will get 10,000 rupees per quintal to the sugarcane growers, and this price has been quoted prior to the harvest. So the farmers will be willing to do this, to grow the sugarcane crop. Now let's say the state of Uttar Pradesh or state of Punjab or state of Haryana, they announces, in addition to this 10,000 rupees per quintal, they announces free electricity to the farmers. All right, or free fertilizers to the farmers. All right, now what does this mean? That the basic amount of subsidy that was agreed, that is 10,000, and this was considered not trade distorting, that has now surpassed. So how that will be trade distorting? Like if Brazil is the another country, actually this has happened. India's sugar export has been challenged by Brazil and several other countries. Like if the Brazil is another sugarcane grower or the exporter of the sugar, it sees that since up till the amount of 10,000 rupees per quintal minimum support price being quoted by the government, it can fairly compete with the Indian sugar. That means Brazil can fairly compete with the Indian sugar. But if there is a further addition to that kind of support being provided, either in the form of free fertilizers being given to the farmers or free electricity being given to the farmers, instead of that being restricted to 10,000 rupees per quintal, it has gone to the support has gone to the extent of 50,000 rupees per quintal as a net value. I mean, if you consider the amount of expenditure they will have to bear for the electricity bill. So then that means that has turned into a trade distorting effect, and then the blue box, what was considered as the blue box subsidy, now turns out to be in the category of amber box or trade distortion subsidy, and now it must be restricted. So that is how these things are decided. Now why there was a need to make the classification on this basis, that allowing the state support to a certain extent, but then also putting it within the margins, or also mentioning that beyond certain extent that should be prohibited, or that should not be considered as the fair extent of support. Reason being, since the WTO is promoting the export of farm products, so the export of farm product has to be regulated in certain manner, and in case they are given the free way, or there is no such restriction, then either directly or indirectly the government of the states, they will try to increase their export by circumventing the rules. So therefore they have made it very clear, the state support under this class are kind of exemption from the general rule of prohibition, but subsidies in this category must be kept within the defined limits so that their effects are not trade distorting. Next is green box. State support given to the farmers in this category are exempt from reduction commitment. State support should not be trade distorting or even a minimum trade distorting effect. Now green box is somewhat similar to that of non-actionable category, as we discussed in subsidies agreement. Now here the farmers, they know it very well that they are exempt from reduction commitment. I mean, the state is not supposed to reduce the subsidies being termed under the green box category. But why they are not supposed to reduce the amount? Because it's very clear that they do not have even a minimal trade distorting effect, therefore they can continue giving the green box subsidy. Next is the explanation of aggregate measurement of support. Aggregate measurement of support means the aggregate measurement of support term is very vital when we discuss the amber box subsidy, which means the annual level of support expressed in monetary terms provided for an agriculture product in favor of the producers of basic agricultural product or non-product specific support provided in favor of agriculture producers in general other than the support that are exempt under Annexure 2 of Agreement on Agriculture. So, aggregate measurement of support is that kind of support that can be of general as well as a specific nature. Now, what is this general nature? General and specific combined. This means like if the government of a state, a government of a country for this harvest season has, let's say, waived off loan of rupees 1 lakh to all the farmers. All right, so this is like the general waiver, and then further they have also reduced the interest rate of the farmers who have taken loan for buying tractors. I write it here. Also reduced the interest rate of the farmers taken loan for buying tractors. Now, what does this mean? That one is the general waiver and then there is a specific waiver. So, that covers the agreement measurement of support that has to be reduced. Thank you. So, we will continue further in our next discussion.